After we have discussed the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the first main section of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi's iqtisad fi al-i'tiqad, we now go on to his al-Qutub al-Thani, the second main section, fi sifati wa fihi sab'atu da'awa, and there are 7 claims made in this about Allah's attributes. إذ ندعي أنه سبحانه قادر عالم حي مريد سميع بصير متكلم. So these are the 7 attributes which we can establish using our reason. We say Allah is qadir, he has power, he is capable; alim, he is knowledgeable; hayyun, he is alive; murid, he has intention, he has will; sami', he listens, he hears; basir, he sees; mutakallim, he is speaker. So God possesses these 7 essential attributes, and the discussion involves 2 areas. So the first is specific rulings for each attribute, and then it discusses the shared features across all. Okay, now the first one, al-qism al-awwal, the first category, as-sifatu al-ula, the first attribute, al-qudra, nad'i annahu muhaddithu al-alami qadirun. We make the claim that the one that caused, or the explanation of the universe is qadir, is capable, is power. Al-Qudra means power, and Qadir means powerful. So power is affirmed through observation of the ordered and precise nature of the world, which implies a capable creator. Here he says, Al-Amru mushtamilun ala anwa'im min al-ajaib wal-ayat. We find in the world, it is there's an accumulation of beautiful, astonishing things and signs. وَذَلِكَ يَدُلُّ عَلَى الْقُدْرَةِ. So and this is an indication upon power, because they are signs, because they are astonishing things, they must be a qudra. The claim argument is every precise act requires a powerful agent. The world is such an act, therefore Allah is powerful. So he says muhkamun murattabun. Mutqinun is, we say there's wisdom, there's order and structure, and it has been structured upon like in different types of ajaib, amazing things and signs. So the argument is kullu fi'lin muhkamin fahuwa sadirun min fa'ilin qadirin, that all wise acts they come from a powerful actor, agent. Wal alamu fi'lun muhkamun, and the world and the creation is a wise act. Fahuwa idhan sadirun min fa'ilin qadir, therefore it must come from a powerful agent. Fafi ay al-aslain an-niza', which premise is the contention in? And then someone might ask, why do you say that the universe is a wise act? It has wisdom within it. And he explains that by wisdom, علينا بكونه محكما ترتبه ونظامه وتناسبه. We're talking about its orderly sequence, the way it's structured, its teleology. You could look at ourselves and we will see this astonishing detail. So through using bil-hissi wal-mushahada, using our senses and witnessing, testifying that everything around us is in fact it has been developed and designed in such a way that how it must be the result of a powerful agent. So someone might argue that the premise, which is anna kulla fi'lin murattabin muhkamun fafa'iluhu qadirun, that all structured and designed acts they are the product of a power. Its agent is powerful, because they might just say, oh, how do you know that this structured act cannot just be the result of some other kind of thing which doesn't imply power? And he says that this is known by this is necessarily known through reason. He even says that the mind, the mind accepts this without even needing any proof. And an intelligent person wouldn't deny this. But despite this, he says that we will present a proof to cut off the tails of those that are stubborn. So then he says, we respond by saying that what we mean by him being powerful is that the action that arises from him, that came from the action that arises because of him, it can either be from his essence or from something additional. And we cannot say that it arose from his essence. We cannot say it arose from his essence alone, because then that would imply that the universe was eternal. But we've already shown that the universe isn't eternal using another proof. And we say the additional attribute now that we are ascribing to this first cause, which gave rise to this act of creation, we call this qudra. This is because in language, qudra refers to an attribute which prepares the action. Because what we mean by qudra in language is that attribute which prepares the action for the agent and by which the action occurs. So now they're saying if the act came from his essence alone, it would be eternal. So this is a contention. Since it is not, it must come from a separate attribute, which is power. So now we're saying, so just to clarify, power is defined as the attribute by which the agent becomes ready to act and through which action occurs. So power is defined as the attribute. So we must say that there's an attribute. We cannot say that it comes from the essence alone because the universe isn't eternal. So there must be an additional attribute through which the agent becomes ready to act and through which action occurs. So someone that doesn't believe that the universe began to exist, they would say that Allah's power isn't an attribute. They'll have to say that everything came from his essence alone. But there's a problem with this divine simplicity because there's no way to distinguish between the attributes, the meaning of the attributes, if all of them are identical to each other. So really what you're saying is there's this essence which has nothing. But we are saying no, by the result, by this orderly and designed universe, we know that there is power. uh, there is something. Because there is something, this shows that this divine essence isn't something which exists alone with nothing inside it, empty, because of reality, because reality exists. So and because reality isn't eternal, it started, it began, it must be something, it must be a separate attribute within Allah's essence which gave rise to this, and this is called power. So power is defined as the attribute by which the agent becomes ready to act and through which action occurs. So there's an objection. How can eternal power produce non-eternal acts? This is the main key question that we are asked. How can an eternal power, something which has always been there, which is beginningless, something which is eternal, remember we said before, it's something which without beginning, how can it produce something which isn't an eternal act? So he says that we will explain this further in the discussion of the will. However, essentially what he's going to do is he's going to show that Allah has knowledge which refers to all possibilities, and then if he only had knowledge which is the knowledge of all possibilities, he has one knowledge which relates it's relational, it relates to all possibilities, then this power would have gave rise to all possibilities without without distinguishing between them. So everything would have came into existence. But we see specific existences and realities, so then we must say there's something within Allah that caused a specific possibility to occur and to arise, and this is known as the will. So the will gave rise to this specific reality, and the will is eternal, but the will can arbitrarily determine when something will come into existence. And so it is not by the power alone that Allah created this universe, by his other attributes as well. So this is the answer to the objection, that how can an eternal power produce non-eternal acts? Then we say God's power pertains to all possible things, contingencies, which are infinite in number. Right, so the amount of things Allah's power is related to is infinite in number. If he created substances and accidents, he must be able to create similar things. Power. So if this means that if you have power over one so remember we said that accident substances in their essences are the same. So if you could create this essence once, what stops you from creating it again? And then there is this Neoplatonic idea that the original existence, the main God, the one, it can only give rise to one thing, because otherwise there would have to be a secondary relation to the second thing that it creates, and that secondary relation would have to be explained within the God. So, but that's only a problem if you hold to divine simplicity, I would argue. If you believe that within Allah's essence there are these different attributes, then there is no problem with saying because he has power, this power, and he has will, and he has knowledge, and the power is related to all logical possibilities, and the knowledge is related to all possibilities as well. And then he could create as much as he wants. He doesn't need to create only one thing. And especially the case if the essence of all things are the same, because as we go deeper into the foundation of reality, we find these atoms, we find this quantum reality. But if you break them down into the smallest indivisible parts, then we find that in essence they are the same. Even today we can agree with this, and therefore if Allah could create one of them, what stops him from creating another one? So especially if he has a will. So God's single eternal power must encompass all possible things, or else one would have to assume infinite distinct powers, which is impossible. And this is kind of like Platonism. So you say there are infinite amount of things which are distinct powers, but rather there's only one single power. There cannot be infinite distinct powers, which is impossible, because we said this before. Why can there not be different powers which are acting? Because if there are multiplicity in them, then what if there's a disagreement between what is to be created, what happens in that situation? And that would lead to absurdities, because then they would imply that if one act or one power was realized over another, that means the other power was lacking. So that would mean that the other one isn't God. So, and another reason is because if you say that an infinite amount of powers that constantly are created, that there's a new one power after another, then you could say, if you don't hold some kind of Platonism, then you could say this is impossible, because you have to first establish that there is something which exists infinitely. but then which is eternal. But if all of these powers are infinite and they'll come after one another and they extend into the past without end, then you fall into the same problem with infinite regress. So God's single eternal power must encompass all possible things, or else one would have to assume an infinite distinct powers, which will lead to an infinite regress, which is impossible. And when we say possible, what Allah has power over, we're talking about possibilities, so movements, colors, substances, and these are endless. So Allah's one power relates to all of these in an infinite amount of things. So divine power has no numeric limit. So there's no single movement or being which lies outside the power potential scope of Allah's power. And this is basically occasionalism. What we're saying here, فَيَلْزِمُهُ أَنَّ كُلَّ مُمْكِنٍ. So this is important. It says this entails that all mumkin فهو مقدور. It can be, it is possible. It's something which Allah has power over. لا محالة necessarily واقع بالقدرة. And all of these possibilities can occur through the qudra, through the power. So this talk, remember, notice he says mumkinat, so only possible things. We don't believe that Allah can do things which do not make sense, because these aren't things which are possible. An impossible thing isn't something which is real. An impossible thing is just something which doesn't make sense in terms of meaning. A square has a different meaning to a circle. They cannot be the same thing. Then there are some issues that arise from this. Since we are saying that Allah's power relates to all possibilities, then there are certain issues that arise. The first sub issue is the opposite of what actually happens also possible? So we're saying now, because Allah's power relates to all possibilities, a question might ask, okay, if what actually occurs, like if in reality all possibilities can be realized, so does that mean that the opposite of what actually happened, can that also be possible? So now we need to clarify something may be necessary, impossible, or possible depending on assumptions about divine will. So it depends on your idea of divine will. What do you mean? What do you think about divine will? And if and however you think about the divine, then this will have an impact on what you think about reality. Is that certain thing which occurred, that event which occurred, is it necessary, or is it impossible, or is it possible? So if you say God's will exists for a thing, its existence is necessary. I use the word will here, but it's talking about maqdur, something which has been it has been will decreed, I guess you could say, decreed through the power. So if Allah's decree, the power, so that which has been decreed, if that which has been decreed by Allah's will exists for a thing, then its existence is necessary. So if Allah wills something to exist, it must exist, not because of itself or because of another outside of it. And if Allah's will is absent, so if someone doesn't believe in the will of God, then then the existence of that thing is impossible. And if Allah's will is not considered at all, then the thing is simply possible in itself. So when we think about something in abstract by itself, from that perspective, then you can say the thing in itself is a possible existence. وبيانه أنه قد ثبت أن كل ممكن مقدور, that we've already explained, we've established that all possible things can be decreed. وأن المحال ليس بمقدور, and those things which are impossible, like a square circle, cannot be decreed. فانظر أن خلاف المعلوم محال أو ممكن لا تعرف ذلك إلا إذا عرفت معنى المحال والممكن. So he's saying that we need to understand what the meaning of impossible and possible is. Allah's power is related to those things which can exist, which are possible existences. Those things which cannot exist, which are impossible to exist, and Allah's will is not related to Allah's power is not related to those things. So those things cannot exist. So when we see something that exists in real life, and we ask the question, can the opposite of what actually happened also occur? Then you have to analyze this thing. The opposite of that thing, if we think of this from Allah's power, Allah's decree, then of course the opposite cannot happen, because Allah's decree must occur. So that thing, the possibility which occurred when it's been realized, necessarily exists. And then if we look, and then we could think about the opposite of what actually occurred, or what is the opposite of what actually occurred, something which is impossible. For example, let's say two things being in two places, or one thing being in two places at once, or two bodies occupying one place at the same time. Then this is not a possibility. I'm not sure how that could be an opposite of something, but I'm just giving an example. It might be crude, but all we're saying is, so if it's not something which is logically possible, then that doesn't exist. If the opposite of the thing which occurred is not logically possible, then it would not exist within Allah's will. So therefore it would be considered impossible. If we consider the possibility and abstraction by itself, then of course it's something which is a possible thing by itself only. So I think maybe possible in itself, but impossible due to something else, i.e. if it contradicts with Allah's eternal knowledge, then it cannot be both possible and impossible in itself. So God's knowledge of future events makes the opposites impossible, not due to their essence. So the essence of certain events may logically be possible, but because there's a contradiction with the divine knowledge, they cannot come into existence, so they will be impossible. So divine power is not limited, and it can relate to anything possible in itself. Saying an act is not within Allah's power due to its contradiction with His knowledge is true in a limited sense, but it doesn't negate essential possibility. So when you look at the possibility of things in abstraction, in terms of logical possibility, then just because they don't actually happen, that doesn't mean that we can't say that thing is possible. So linguistically, people commonly attribute power over opposite actions, e.g., movement and stillness, even if only one will occurs. This supports attributing power despite foreknowledge. Then there's a question here. It's talking about, because if you say that Allah's power is it reigns and is sovereign over all possibilities, so that means that Allah's power is the one that is behind everything. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There's no power other than with Allah. So what about human animals and acts? Are they also under divine power? So denying Allah's power over them contradicts the claim of universal power. So we already said that Allah has power over all things, but if we also affirm human power and animal acts, like they have a power of their own, then this will become affirming. It raises the problem of one act being under two powers, which seems impossible. So this is known as causal overdetermination. So it's something known as causal overdetermination. So here he is going to he's going to discuss the different views on the qadar, fate, and the taqdeer and free will, and since it's quite a deep issue, we'll discuss the next time. Inshallah.